Chapter 5. Simply Petrified. The quintet walked through the small sprite town, shadowed within woven blades of grass that formed a towering wall around them. Light only barely sprinkled the ground through a leafy canopy from the outside tree cover. Nathaniel had been eyeing the mushroom homes and shops around them curiously for a while, until he couldn't help but to go touch one. Something just looked off about them. When his fingers ran across the rough surface, he had to ask, why do these mushrooms feel like cement?
They're petrified,
Boss said, glancing over at Nathaniel.
We are in a town occupied mostly by petri sprites.
Nathaniel took a closer look at the sprites milling about around him. Unlike the town he had first encountered with many different shapes and color of sprites, all of these seemed to be very similar to one another. They had light gray skin, hair, and eyes, and wore differing gray variants of clothes.
I thought petrifaction was caused by silica replacing whatever organic material is decaying, usually wood, right?
I just took a course on this subject, Nathaniel said, looking to Aaliyah to see if she was impressed.
Who do you think puts the silica there?
Flem rolled his eyes.
Such a fancy word, silica. It's just petri spit. And that organic material they are replacing is their food. Aha! There it is.
Flem hobbled quickly over to a building carved into a stonified tree trunk, muttering something about being able to turn the Nile River yellow.
Aaliyah laughed. I actually wouldn't mind using a restroom either.
We could all use a pick-me-up,
Bunny added, making a beeline for the building.
I hear this place has great rock cakes.
Nathaniel snickered, wondering if she was purposely being ironic. They started toward the entry when Boss put a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder to hold him back.
Let's keep those round tips covered, shall we?
He said, pulling Nathaniel's curly hair down over his ears.
Don't want to attract any unnecessary attention.
With a squirm in his stomach, they continued through the door, going under a sign that read, The Hollowed Trunk. Nathaniel noticed right away that the dozen or so customers were all staring at them as they stood in the entrance. Flem apparently had already made it to a toilet, as he was nowhere to be seen. Bunny put a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder and guided her away, saying,
Come with me if you want to pee.
Boss looked down at Nathaniel.
How about you, kiddo? Gotta go?
Nathaniel crinkled his nose.
I must be dehydrated. I haven't had to go for a while.
Let's get you fixed up then.
He took Nathaniel deeper into the room. In the center of the dark establishment were about a dozen round wooden tables and chairs. There was a small stage in the back with dusty stools stacked upon it, advertising its lack of use for some time. Immediately in front of him, however, was the complete opposite proclamation. A tap-lined bar that stretched the length of the room was where the business boomed. All the patron sprites occupied this location. There were 2 bartenders serving there, and they looked to be the only ones working in the entire place. Boss took one of 2 open stools that were squeezed between a couple of middle-aged, googly-eyed Petries. Nathaniel uncomfortably took the other. He didn't like being stared at. He wanted to leave, but he was very thirsty.
We'll be quick,
Boss said down to Nathaniel's worried look. One of the bartenders came over.
What can I do you for?
He asked.
We'll just have 2 glasses of water, please,
Boss said, rubbing his hands together. The bartender stared at him.
And maybe some rock cakes, to go, and 5 bottles of nectar,
Boss added uncertainly. The bartender stared at him some more. He took a yellow spray bottle from underneath the counter, cleaned a glass with it, set the bottle on the counter, then finally said to Boss, Don't I know you? Boss's eyes flinched side to side.
Maybe. I passed through here a few years back.
Nah, the bartender chewed on his tongue. Ain't that? Boss parted his hands up and shrugged his shoulders.
I don't know then. Sorry.
The bartender kept his eyes on Boss as he filled 2 nutshells with water. He clunked the cups down in front of them. Nathaniel picked up the one in front of him and stared into the contents. It was clear like water, but it had little floaters in it. He smelled it. Seemed fine. He sipped it. "Hey, Jet," the bartender called, and the second bartender came over. "This face look familiar to you?" Jet looked at Boss intently. As Boss took his scrutiny, Nathaniel noticed the spray bottle in front of him. Its large, blaring front font said, "Grit the Gook," and in small print below, "Your multi-purpose gook getter." Nathaniel spun the bottle around and read, "Active ingredients, 99% lysozyme, 1% other." And in smaller print at the bottom, "This lysozyme collection is single-sourced, producing a high-quality product at a lower cost to you." Just then, Flem rushed between Boss and Nathaniel, took up Boss's water, and chugged it down. "Oh, man," Flem said, catching his breath after the last gulp. "I'm telling you, I needed that." Bunny and Aaliyah joined them. The bartender took the spray bottle and put it back under the counter, giving Nathaniel a quizzical look.
"Better?"
Boss asked them, trying to ignore his current stare-down. Bunny nodded. "Oh yeah, let's get some But before the word cakes came out, Jet had dropped a big bag of them in front of Nathaniel. "You know, Chet," Jet said, putting a wooden-handled case of 5 yellow jars down next to the bag of rock cakes. "I think I do recall his face." Boss dropped a few coins onto the bar and grabbed the wooden handle on the nectar case.
"Well, we better be off. Keep the change."
He nodded to the 2 bartenders, put his arms around the group, and started rushing them out. Nathaniel quickly scooped the rock cakes into his arms and about knocked over his stool from the unceremoniously forced retreat. As the group exited the door, Nathaniel could just barely hear Jet saying to Chet, "But I don't recall if he was blue back then, was he?" Outside the hollowed trunk, Flem grabbed the nectar case from Boss and started handing out the jars. "Oh, you are a genius! I've always said it, nectar juice!" Flem twisted off the top of the jar and took a gulp. He licked his lips. "If I ever meet a nectar sprite, I swear I'm going to marry her." Nathaniel and Aaliyah looked at each other, smiling as they uncapped their jars. "Cheers," Aaliyah said, holding out her jar. Nathaniel clanked his against hers and said, "Bottoms up." They took a big gulp together. "Wow," they exclaimed, and noticed each other's little yellow mustaches. They both wiped their mouths. "It's like honey, butter, vanilla, and... Nathaniel struggled for the last ingredient. "Sassafras." Aaliyah filled in the blank. Nathaniel laughed. "What?" "There's a drink imported into my town made from sassafras. It's kind of like a root beer. This has a hint of that in the aftertaste." Nathaniel opened the bundle of rock cakes, and everyone took one. He was thankful they were not as hard as their names suggested, and washed it down with more nectar. He and Aaliyah were about to take another drink when Bunny put a hand over each jar. "You only need a smidge of that stuff every few hours. You can overdose on it, you know. Don't drink it before bed either, or you won't sleep a wink. I don't know why this place sells it in such large quantities."
"For the Odinata,"
a tall Petri sprite wearing chaps and a cowboy hat said, walking up to the group. His long gray hair cusped the broad shoulders of his thick, long brown jacket.
"You folks look like you're in need of a ride. I'm just the sprite to see for that."
He stuck out his hand to Boss and said with a wink,
"You can call me Blewett."
The Odinata he had mentioned ended up being a kind of insect that looked very much like a dragonfly with 4 separate wings and long, skinny, pointy bodies. The difference from a dragonfly was in their heads, which were like a seahorse's, and tail tips, which had a kind of serrated tooth curving down at the end. They were oddly beautiful. With the size Nathaniel currently found himself, these insects were over 4 times his length. 6 of them perched lightly upon and tied to a horizontal wooden beam across from a pond. One of them had dark maroon wings with clear tips. Its body matched its wing color. A second had a shiny blue body with a light hint of blue in its mostly clear wings. A third had a turquoise green body and velvety black wings. A fourth was red with points of black and clear wings. And the last 2 were yellow with clear wings.
Whoa,
Nathaniel said, walking up to the maroon Odonata.
we get to ride these?
He held out a hand to an Odonata and let it sniff him. He looked closer at the reins latched around the creature's mouth, which strung back to a 2-seater saddle on its back. He saw that only the 2 bigger Odonata, the maroon one and the black-winged one, had this 2-seater saddle.
How much for the 2 big ones and the small red one?
Boss asked Blewett.
Well now, for just those 3, it's going to be 15 gold pieces.
Blewett started.
15? That's outrageous.
Boss protested.
Now I ain't finished. You're going to need a handler with you. Oh, of course. How else you expect me to get my babies back home? This ain't a human rent-a-car, you know. You can't just drop them off at your next stop.
Boss nodded in frustration.
And how much more is that going to be? You'll need to add another Odonata for the handler.
At this point, Aaliyah dragged Nathaniel off to the far end of the Odonata fence. She seemed motivated to get away from the rising tensions.
How are you holding up? She asked Nathaniel in a small voice.
I'm okay, he said, really unsure of how he was holding up. How are you?
She nodded. Fine.
The turquoise Odonata beside them sniffed Aaliyah's hair. She giggled.
Beautiful, aren't they? She said, petting its nose.
Yeah, Nathaniel nodded. Aaliyah glanced over to the loud negotiating voices that were taking no notice of her.
Do you think they know where we are?
Aaliyah asked in a whisper. What? Nathaniel asked, surprised.
I mean,
her voice was almost inaudible.
Could you find your way home from here?
Could he find his way home from here? He had flown through a magic hole, jumped off a time-looping ship, traveled underwater to some giant grass shore, and was standing in a petrified town where his only clue as to his whereabouts were the sprites around him seemed to have a country accent. And even then, he wasn't sure if that could really tell him anything for certain. They could still be in a foreign country for all he knew. Are you thinking of running? Nathaniel gawked. She smiled coyly.
No.
She petted the Odonata affectionately.
Flying.
Nathaniel gulped. I don't know. I've been thinking about it. They know where I live, so if I go home, their boss will just try and take my wish away by force, by making me tell him my wish. I might be able to handle that. My mom has called me stubborn more than once, but it might be better to try and get the exchange with these guys. At least we're guaranteed something that way. What do you think?
We can't trust them. No sprite is trustworthy. They do nothing but lie and cheat to get what they want. We have our wishes now. I think we should run if we have the chance.
Nathaniel caught Bunny staring at him. He cleared his throat. We can't talk about this right now. Aaliyah took notice of Bunny and straightened up. Finally! Flem exasperated. Let's get out of here. Aaliyah and Nathaniel moved toward the group.
See if we can ride together,
she whispered behind Nathaniel's back. Nathaniel's eyes were wide, and he swallowed dryly. How was he going to handle this one? He didn't want to disappoint Aaliyah, but he didn't think they'd last a day away from their sprite troop as tiny, easy-to-swallow morsels either. Had Aaliyah not seen what that bombardier was capable of? Did she know how to get big again? Maybe with Bunny's dust, but how would they get a hold of some? He wasn't sure if this plan had been thought through, and there was no way to get Aaliyah alone to continue discussing it before making a rash move. Okay, Boss sighed, turning to his group. How are we going to split this up? Aaliyah nudged Nathaniel in the back. Nathaniel squeaked from peer pressure. I can take one. He knew it sounded stupid and out of left field, but he pushed on. And Aaliyah can ride with me. All the sprites looked at him, expressionless. Aaliyah nodded with a grin. Then Flem snorted.
Right. Yeah.
Boss picked back up.
Nathaniel, you're with me on the maroon one. Aaliyah rides with Bunny on the big green one. Flem, you take the red one and...
Boss turned to Blewett.
I can pick my own just fine, thanks.
Blewett said with a wink.
Let's ride.